this book came out in February 2023, and it is called Real-Time Leadership: Find Your Winning Moves When the Stakes Are High. And I love the title. It's an attention grabber. And it's filled with your experience as a coach to CEOs. It's filled with stories. It's filled with research. And I know I learned so much that we're going to get into later. But to start, I really want to know, when did you fall in love with coaching CEOs?
Oh, interesting. When did I fall in love with it? I'm not exactly sure. My guess is in 2009, I started a 6-year gig with Unilever where I was worked with Paul Pullman as the CEO at the time. And I think at that time, I really saw the impact they can have and the power if they choose to be a force for good. When I was first there, Paul was new, and what he wanted to do is help this cultural change to really kind of increase performance orientation, but not at the expense of values. But the way he did it was he felt I was part of a group of Authentic Leadership Institute, and he really felt that if everybody could really find their purpose, and then find a way to connect it to what they did, it would be like a powerhouse. And I remember standing in the headquarters in London, and him at that point, putting this out on big video. And it reminded me of kind of Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek, where it's just like, make it so. And it just felt this incredible power, and how CEOs can really be a force for good. So I think that was probably it. It was January 2010.
Nice. And so you helped affect change through the CEO in this case, and that helped you just kind of feel this power that you can continue to do this. And I would just imagine that throughout time, you've had to look around your circle and realize that you are getting more and more involved in a very exclusive group. And so I would just kind of imagine, I'm curious, like, what is it like for you to be one of the few people that a CEO can actually lean on, can actually maybe laugh with, can actually open up to? I mean, how do you take that responsibility on?
On one hand, to be daunted by it, and on the other, to take it very lightly. You're just there. I think the key is overcoming ego. If you can be kind of ego-free, then you are fine with these people. And I'll tell you my very, very, very first coaching CEO experience, which was, gosh, I don't even know how long ago it was, like a long time ago. And a client of mine who is the head of a PR firm, who was extremely intimidating, said, I want to refer someone to you. I need to let you know she's the most intimidating person I've ever met. And no one has ever heard this on podcasts, by the way. Okay, so fine. This was way back when. It was my very first CEO gig. And it was like the most money that I ever had made, at that. And I remember before the session in this very room, sort of prepping and, thinking about things. And then all of a sudden I realized I was trying to be smart, that I was trying to be impressive. And it just hit me like, Carol, like, stop. You're here to be of service to this person, and that's it. So just like, that's what you need to do. And this part I haven't ever shared. It's so whimsical. I do not recommend doing this. So I did a minute of kind of meditation and then centered myself, freed up and fleed from the whole ego thing. I think, if I'm going to serve this person, it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. So she gets on the phone. She starts talking, and it's like a machine gun. She's like, well, and it's energy, and it's building, and she's talking about this, and she's talking about that, and she's talking about this, and she's talking about that. And then finally, and I will call her Jane, finally, I interrupted. I could not believe I did this. I said, Jane. She did not stop talking. I go, Jane. She did not stop. I could go, Jane, shut up. 30-second silence now. It was the longest 30 seconds. And then I'm like, as soon as I was out of my mouth, I went, oh my God, I can't believe it. I was dying to break the silence after like 7 seconds. I'm like, I have to give this 30 seconds. So at the end of the 30 seconds, I said, okay. And I didn't know what I was going to hear, like, you're fired.
Yeah.
And she said, thank you, Carol. Thank you. And so then we started talking. So now it's fast forward 3 years or something, and we were ending the coaching. And she said, we were reminiscing, and she said, Carol, there is nobody on this planet who could tell me to shut up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't believe you did that. The only reason I was able to do it was that moment before. If I had been trying to make an impression, if I had been trying to be smart or whatever, that's not an intervention you do on purpose, but you can only do it from purpose. So that was the very beginning. I haven't thought about that in ages.
That's a really interesting situation, and obviously that was a high stakes scenario you were in, and you actually went with that action, and it led to that outcome. And what I think is interesting is you figured out that, yeah, you're there for service, and then you figured out how to create the space for her to also be able to catch her breath and then move on. And so I think one of the biggest things I got from your book was, because of your perspective of, coaching CEOs, you laid out a lot of examples of, like, phrases to say or situations where you can create space. And so one of the biggest takeaways from your book was just how to actually be a coach. And so I think, reminder to yourself that you're there to be in service, and a reminder to yourself that you're there to just create the space for the outcome to occur. Yeah, but just diving into your book now, really getting into it, you lay out the key framework, which is the MOVE framework, MOVE, M standing for be mindfully alert. This is alert around your external priorities, around your internal inner human challenges, and also your interpersonal challenges and relationships. O being generate options. Think about how in a situation you can create some new pathways forward. V being validate your vantage point and taking in also different perspectives from around you. And then E being, okay, I'm ready to engage and affect change. And that could be a micro change, or that could be 10x kind of change. And so that was the framework that you laid out. And I definitely think we should talk about what each one implies. But just to give you some context, on many episodes, this community that's listening right now, they understand what it means to be alert. They understand what it means to, have that concept that regardless of what's coming at you from the external world, you have 100% control of how you react to it and what you put out. So that's something that we've talked about a lot. I think it ties into another concept of your book of, how you can measure yourself around how calm you are, how composed you are, or, how much compassion you're emulating in one given moment. So that's kind of like the framework for everything. That's like what underscores everything. So if we just kind of separate that part, I would be curious what you would want to tell us more about as it relates to those dimensions of leadership around the external challenge, the internal challenge, and the interpersonal challenges.
Okay, that's great. Really lovely to hear you describe the book. I'm like, you really captured it. So thank you for studying it and internalizing it. It's a pleasure to hear. So I will talk a little bit about the M in MOVE. So the M is, sort of mindful, which, as you said, people are familiar with, and how to not be judging things, and how to really be aware and alert, not prejudge and notice, but then more like an athlete than a meditator. And I think of sort of tennis. My husband's a big tennis fan, so I think I've seen all the opens except Australia.
Nice.
And it's really just fascinating how, especially if you can be close and see their eyes, they are so alert. It's like mega alert of like what's going on around them. Then there's a book from years ago by Tim Galloway called The Inner Game of Tennis, and how are they talking to themselves, etc. And then how do they want to relate to their opponent, and how they want to relate to the arena. So mindfully alert to everything going on around you. And then how can you use that in real time is when you walk into a meeting and the split second question you can ask yourself is, okay, what do I really need to accomplish, like right now?
Mm.
And one of the things that I think about is the whole work applies at the top of the house, but it also applies inside your own house. And it wasn't until the book was out of my claws and I couldn't say anything more on it that I realized I had written a parenting book. So if you go through the whole book with the idea that it's a parenting book, it really kind of blows your mind. So a parenting example, because there's lots of CEO examples. Okay, it's a while ago. My son is 11 years old. It's the end of the day. I'm tired. I walk into the dining room and he's there with this squalid mess in front of him, crumpled papers and all this. And I walk in, he goes, "Mom, I'm done with my homework. Can I watch TV now?" Okay, so what do you need to do? What is your external challenge here? So it's the same thing. You walk into a room with your team and there's a pressing decision. You immediately think, make the decision or get the homework done. But is it? So the split second question is, what do I really need to do right now? And so for Michael, was it get the homework done? Was it help him have a sense of discipline? Was it help him have a love of learning? Was it help him watch his mother not have her head explode at the end of the day? When I go through the next section on options generator, I'll tell you what I did. But so there's that. So what is it I really need to do? And then how I got there. But then who do I want to be right then? So the second dimension is who do I want to be? And for that, have I, in that case, developed myself enough so I have enough emotion regulation so that I can make a choice? Because if you don't, if you haven't invested in who you are and who you want to be, then it's very hard in that split second moment to figure out, well, who do I want to be and can I be that person?
Right.
So Marshall Goldsmith calls that, who do I want to be right now, the Carol Kauffman question, but he actually changed it. And it's, am I being the person that I want to be right now? And then the third one being, well, how do I need to relate in this moment? And the big differentiation there is the golden rule, which is a good bar, but it's a lower bar than the platinum rule, which is not how do I not treat others as I would want to be treated, but treat others as they would want to be treated, which might be very different. So let's say, are you despite your friendly face, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Oh, I would say that over the course of my life, I feel like I've become more introverted.
Okay, so let's imagine you're an introvert, and your boss is an extrovert, and you're having trouble with something, and the extrovert sees you and goes like, "Oh my goodness, he needs help," and so he or she runs over and helps you and gives you a pep talk and really is like right there, and you're like, "Give me space, get away from me." They're giving you what they would want. So now let's
Mhm.
flip it and you're the boss and the extrovert is the person having trouble and you see them having trouble and you think, "Oh, well, they really need some space to sort things out." And meanwhile, they're feeling abandoned by you and not getting help. So I'll pause there in terms of just the three dimensions of leadership and and how we make the spaces for those choices.
Yeah, no, this is super powerful because this is what I'm talking about in terms of like that language that people can use. So the way I was thinking about it as I was taking all the information in is, okay, I can run an algorithm in my mind. So many times you hear, okay, when you're in a high stake situation, take a breath and then calm down and then take an action. That's great. I think that's fine. I think the element that's missing is that in that breath, what are you doing? Or what are you asking
Yes,
yourself?
yes,
And
right,
so that's
right.
why this is important, right? So if you're thinking about the external challenges in that breath or in that moment, you can say, okay, what does a win look like right now? What do I want to achieve? That split second question
Yep.
is what you can run in your mind. On the internal side, as you mentioned, am I being the person that I want to be right now in real time? Um, when it comes to the relationships, am I leading in the way that others actually need me to? Or am I doing what I can right now to be the most relatable or best relatable person I can be? Like these are the types of questions that I
Mhm.
now know I can ask myself in that breath. And so that's why I think that's really important in terms of these dimensions of leadership. And then you had briefly alluded to it towards the end around what is probably a myth, right? Like this idea that you should treat other people how you want to be treated. That's fine. It's gotten us to this point in society. But you're right. I think there's this level of actually being more empathetic when you can say, okay, how am I supposed to treat the person that's in front of me the way they want to be treated? And another thing I got from your book is just look, we all take information in differently. We all process information differently. It just
Mhm.
was a reminder that the spectrum of humans is incredibly wide, which actually should make it easier to accept the person in front of you for who they are, and then also accept yourself for who you are, because the spectrum is so wide. So many
Mhm.
possibilities exist. Why give each other a hard time and why give yourself such a hard time? Try to put yourself in the person's shoes, try to figure out what makes them tick or what doesn't, and then build that relationship that way.
Yeah, exactly right, exactly right.
And then, I mean, in terms of just another thing that you can do in these moments is around measuring how calm you are, how much
Yeah.
compassion you have, how much curiosity you have. Are you even clear in the moment? So there are ways to kind of like recalibrate yourself in these moments of decisions as well.
Yeah, yeah, because we've got the three dimensions of leadership, the four stances, which we'll get to later, and then the five C's. So the way I think of it is imagine this is your backbone and you want to be centered. And I think of the five C's can like center your backbone. And this is work taken from Dick Schwartz called the Internal Family Systems Model. And and this part of it is how do you be your wisest and your best self? And how can you even know? And how can you even get there?
Yeah.
And so the way that he talks about it that we've adopted is to just be in a moment and to be able to say on a scale of 1 to 10, how calm are you? So first I'll tell a David story. It's a great story. And then I'll tell you a story of mine that's me. So David was working with some very big private equity CEO who was a real rhymes with never mind, bad word. Um, and David's there, and David sees that he's not in a good state to start the meeting, but David has just met him. Never stops David from speaking his mind. And David was an operating executive, the head of two different strategy firms, worked at JP Morgan, started the world's first digital bank, lots and very different and great, different background, great partner. So he then says, well, I want to take you through an exercise. The guy rolls his eyes and said, yeah, sure. And he goes, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how calm are you? 10 is crystal, no, 10 is like, really chill. You're totally fine. 1 is you're in a frenzy. He goes, 10. And then he goes, well, how clear are you? Clear is clear as a bell here. And, 1 is like, fuzzy. He goes, 10. And he goes, well, how curious are you? And he goes like 10. And then it was like, do I even have to ask how like courageous are you? Like 20. Then he goes, well,
Yeah.
how compassionate are you towards yourself and others? Silence. And then the guy goes, I think I'm low on that. And then David goes, can you think of when you are good at that? When are you a 10 out of 10 on being compassionate? Now, what I want to pause for a moment is that is actually, people talk about a strengths-based interventions. So immediately, instead of saying, gee, well, tell me about when you're not compassionate, it's flip it immediately. Tell me about when you really are a 10 out of 10. He had a picture of his son on his desk, as do I, as I notice I'm looking at it. And he goes, yeah, I've felt that for him. He goes, but we got to go to the meeting. So they walk in the meeting. Now, this is the first 15 minutes David's ever met the guy. They walk into the meeting, and it's a meeting where the CFO is about to take a leave. So he goes in, there's the executive committee, all men, of course, and all tough men. And the CFO is describing he wants to take a leave because his father's dying. And as he's talking, he starts sobbing uncontrollably. And everyone is there going like,
Yeah.
no idea what to do. And then there was about 5 seconds of silence. And then the CEO got up, walked over to the CFO, sat down next to him, put his hand on his shoulder, and said, it'll be okay. Don't worry. We'll have your back. Changed everything in that moment. And what he said later is, if we hadn't gone over that stupid exercise of yours, I never would have thought to do that. And not only was it startling for the executive committee to see such a very different behavior, but of course it became the talk of the town, and it rippled out about how the CEO showed a compassionate side, which no one had ever seen before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he probably was able to relate to the moments he said something similar to his own son. And here you just used it on, his C-suite peer, and it worked to the same effect. And so he had that ability to go through that exercise. Maybe even if he rolled his eyes at it, it actually helped him on later. And in that moment, he leaned in.
Mm,
He was able to actually help and take a stance that helped resolve the issue or helped kind of put this person at ease. And so he had that choice of leaning in. He could have also just done nothing. Maybe
right.
he could have
Or
tried to
frozen,
collect
right.
or frozen. So in that moment, he took a stance as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. So, how can you use this? So, I'll share an example from myself where this is like a really helpful model. I was about to have a really tough conversation with a business partner who had been letting me down extraordinarily. And so I had written a friend of mine about that. I think I need to, replace this person to get a new partner. And so she wrote back, and in capital letters in the email, she wrote, I think I have found a replacement for your partner. Unbeknownst to her, she had sort of replied to another email where this partner was BCC'd.
Mm.
So all of a sudden, this person sees in their email how I'm going to replace them and how this friend of mine has found someone. Okay. Not my friend, not realizing she had blank copied. So I get a series of very loud texts, like
Yeah.
big, like, you blank, like, I can't believe you did this, you sneak, you know, um, I can't believe you did this. Should I start looking for a new job? Like, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, let's talk tomorrow. So the next day I am absolutely dreading this conversation, because it's easier to have a tough conversation when you're like in the right, but we're
Yeah.
talking about having a tough conversation and I was in the wrong,
Right.
like,
Exactly. Exactly.
ow.
Yeah.
And so I sat down. I was so desperate that I decided I should use my own book to help me, which is like really pathetic.
No, I imagine you do this a lot because you are in high stakes situations all the time. You have to be running through this framework, even if you're not
Yeah,
realizing you're doing it.
yeah. So I'm like, okay. So I actually got out my notebook and wrote down, okay, calm on a scale of 1 to 10. Um, how calm am I? It was like a 2. That's really not calm. I thought, okay, what are the things that can help me? Like, downshift my energy, breathe, remind myself I've done harder things in the past, et cetera, but get to calm. Then clear. I was at the time I was fine with clarity, but when I'm really in the middle of something, and particularly if someone's mad at me, particularly when I've been a bad girl, I don't stay clear. I can forget what I think. I once famously said to someone in the middle of a fight, I know I have a point. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, we've
and
all
she
been
stopped
there.
laughing so hard she stopped being mad at me. It was a roommate years and years ago. But I thought, okay, well, why don't I really hang on to what are the top three things that have been the most disruptive in what she's done? So I did that. And then curious. So with curious, thinking, okay, David has a wonderful way of taking that into something very actionable, which is just ask another question. So, I know I was going to get a huge vent. And so at the end of the vent, instead of the pushback or the here's what I was thinking, but no defense, no explanation, just another question, which affected. Then compassion. And I thought, well, how can I just cross over the bridge to her world and really see it as she does, the betrayal and the violation from me, of going behind her back, of sneaking, which she was completely correct. I was sneaky, um, and not really following my own values. But I could see also what led up to this impasse, and appreciate that more. Then to courageous, which is, hi, I'm allowed to hire whoever I want. It's like
Mm,
my business.
right, right.
Um, but then like really thinking, okay, how can I just be authentic about my own experience? And courage is the courage to say something, but it's also often the courage to not say something. They both take courage. So we get on the Zoom. First of all, she looks like a crazy person when I see her. I mean, I was like, her hair's all tousled and she's like not quite crying, but whatever. And then just like bang, starts like, I can't believe this. And she's quite magnificent in her temper. Um, and but she really looked like disheveled, everything. Then she did something. So I actually credit her with the key pivot, which doesn't sound like it's going to be a key pivot when I start. And it's like, she's like, we shouldn't even be having this conversation. I shouldn't even be talking to you right now. Like, I don't even want to talk to you. I mean, this is ridiculous. I'm just being defensive and I just would think we shouldn't talk at all. She said, I'm just being defensive. And so what I then said, so here's the curiosity part. I said, listen, why don't we take the word defensive and just put it to the side completely? You're not being defensive. You're just sharing with me your experience. So I'd like to hear more. Now, already I can see her getting centered, talking to me. And then we sort of went on a bit, and then and then we got to, so listen, you're as this business partner, your job was to do X, let's say marketing. Um, you're not doing your job. You're not doing your job at all. But you are doing other things that are magnificently helpful that no one can do. So listen, I need someone to do more of this social media. Go find someone, have them work for you. So I want you to find the person who's doing the job that you don't want to do. You do the things that you want to do, and the person will work for you. And I want them by the end of the week. Well, as we were having that conversation, she just transformed, like in front of my eyes, into this, like, I mean, her hair practically combed itself. I mean,
Yeah.
she just turned into this like magnificent, very, very smart, smarter than me, actually, person who was there to help. And if I hadn't done the 5 C's, now there's one part I left out, and this is key. This was really key. And for those of you who have this, you got to do this too. So after I did the 5 C's, I then went to the first dimension of leadership, which was, what do I want to accomplish? And if I was really truthful with myself, what I really wanted to accomplish was to put her nose in the friggin' pee-pee and to let her know exactly how she had made me feel when I was in the ER and she didn't do this and when she this. I mean, that's really a big part of me. That's what I wanted to do. And then that's where I got to the first dimension of leadership is really make sure what you're not allowed to do.
Right.
It's like if she left, she was so helpful. She went so far behind the call of duty in so many areas that there's no way I could function without her. But really getting that in my darkest heart, I just wanted to punish her. I wanted to make her feel as bad as she made me feel. Well, come on. A, it's pretty black and white. B, she had said that she didn't like doing this, and I just kept making her do it. So why hadn't I thought of this ages ago to split the job up? So
Right.
anyway, that was how the book really, and we're working together. And she did find someone, and that person's working out beautifully.
Nice. And it sounds like actually in that moment you gave her some power too, because you're like, oh, go find the person who can do the job that you don't want to do and do what you really want to do. And that's empowering in a way.
Yeah.
I'm glad. And it's interesting. So you have those 3 dimensions of leadership. You have the 4 stances. You have the 5 C's. There's obviously a lot a person needs to balance at the CEO or leader level. If
Hmm.
we're playing with numbers, what are maybe the 2 biggest stumbling blocks that you see new CEOs or new leaders, trip over? And maybe what's the one major area where CEOs fall short?
So I work 2 days a week for this search and management consulting firm called Egon Zehnder. And they typically just work at the top of the house. And they did a survey last year or so where they gave out a questionnaire to 1,000 CEOs with an annual revenue of 4 trillion. So these are not little baby CEOs, okay?
Right.
And one of the questions they asked them was, what have you been told most often is your Achilles heel? And the 3 things that came back were talking too much, not listening, and being impatient. And so, like, what are the challenges of I think actually they apply to anybody, but those were sort of the 3 biggies of how to help yourself learn to listen, talk less, and they're not exactly the same. Um, and to be impatient. And the thing is, leaders and so many of us are under the kind of pressure that would crush an ordinary person.
Definitely.
And so a lot of what comes out is a side effect of this massive stress that they're under. And I think the other thing that a new CEO has to work with is the shift in their vantage point, how they see the world and how other people see them. Because
Yeah.
all of a sudden, when you're a CEO, everybody wants a piece of you. Everyone has an agenda, and they think they are so artful about hiding their agenda when it's so screamingly obvious. Just like you might as well just be honest about your agenda. Um, and it's a different identity. So I would say it's the 3 things I found in the CEO survey, and really thinking about your identity as a leader and how much you have to actually sacrifice, because you can't say whatever you want,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
I'd be curious in that study of 1,000 folks, given those were the 3 major kind of stumbling blocks, or Achilles heel, how many of them were male versus female? Because just if somebody read those words that those were the 3 items, it sounds like more male characteristics. But that's just aside. Maybe we can
No,
talk
no,
about
no,
that
no. I
later.
wrote a paper on that actually. Um, of the 1,000 CEOs, of course, 90% were
Yeah.
men, which
Right.
meant you still had 100 women, and it was exactly the same.
Yeah. Maybe it's just like
But
archetype.
but I think female CEOs of significant companies, they've got backbones of steel and they've been messed around and they're under a lot of pressure. And they also have to worry about talking too much, not listening, and being impatient.
You mentioned a couple beats ago around how a new CEO or new leader, their vantage point really needs to change. And I think like we can really start to get into the mind of a CEO. So if you're someone like me who's striving, who wants to just continue to move up and maybe at some point get into a leadership leadership position, like you have to be thinking about these things, that your vantage point is the key, especially when you take on a new big role. But you're going to have a whole new set of relationships with your peers, with your bosses, or, the board of directors. Maybe there's going to be people that were peers that are now reporting to you. So now you have to look at that relationship differently. Then you
Mm,
have maybe a mandate that you're going to try to fulfill that is different than what you thought it was going to be. Um, and then you also mentioned around how people try to come at you and they're going to try to hide their agenda, but it's obviously clear. And so there's so much that you have to navigate, and there's so much lying on how you're treating people.
mm,
It's really a crazy balancing act. So if anyone who just thinks like, oh, I want to be a CEO, it's like you have to balance all these things, and then you have to have this enterprise level mindset where you represent the entire organization. You're
mhm.
responsible for potentially breaking down silos. You're responsible for knowing what's going on across all teams, and you're responsible
Right.
for every single thing you say and do. And so it's just one of those things that, again, the best part about your book is that it just allows someone to understand the game better, whether they're watching the
Mm,
game, whether they're actually
mhm,
experiencing the game of being a CEO. But the reason I'm saying all this is because if I'm ever in a situation and I'm maybe in an elevator with a new leader or a new CEO, I feel like knowing this information, I would want to actually ask them questions like, hey, I know you have a lot on your plate. Like, how do you think you're doing on breaking down the silos? How do you think you're doing on building these new relationships with people and peers? And how is that going for you? And I just think that if you ever
mm,
caught yourself in a situation with a leader or CEO and started asking them those types of questions, first of all, you're hitting on what's close to their heart and mind, and
mhm.
it's without an agenda. It's really just curious around how you're balancing this new role.
It's so funny. You're bringing out all these stories in me that I've never talked about. So here's another experience I had. This is ages ago, where a very dear friend of mine who really sort of started executive coaching in the UK. His name's John Whitmore, Sir John Whitmore, race car driver turned coach. And he took me to this event called Goodwood. And he'd like won Le Mans and all kinds of things. But we were at this like intimate dinner in the gigantic great room of Lord March, the illegitimate, one in a long series, illegitimate children of Charles II. Um,
Wow.
from 1660s. Okay, so there I am, this intimate dinner, and I'm at a big table, 8 people. And the damn table was like 8 feet. And then my friend is sitting on the other side, and I'm sitting the other side of me of a bunch of, macho CEOs. Now, this is before I ever coached any of them. And so I was like so far out of my socioeconomic status. And I'm there looking at John, like, feels like a mile away. I'm like, kill me now. What am I going to do with all these guys, and how am I going to endure the next 2 hours? Um, and so there's some guy sitting there. So it's like I'm talking with the CEO of Mercedes-Benz was one side, then the CEO of Jaguar, the CEO of like all of them at that level, and me. And then some guy next to me, I said, "Oh, so what do you do?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm the CEO of," and he named something that I hadn't heard of, some kind of watch. I knew enough to pretend I knew the name of the watch. Because I figure, okay, it must be some fancy schmancy watch. Like, what the heck? And he goes, "Oh, I'm the CEO of blah, blah, blah." And okay, silence. And then I'm like, "So how many people are in your company?" And he goes, "Oh, 1,000." Silence. And then I said, "Tell me, what is it that you love about being a CEO?" And he just started talking about they're like a family and I care about them. And then there was this like incredible conversation. And the Mercedes guy now leans in and he starts talking, and the next guy starts talking, and then it all start, and the 2 hours just goes right by. But it was a very different kind of conversation. What do you love about what you do? And the little
Hmm.
watch company was something called, what is it, Philippe Patek. Um,
Interesting. I was running through my mind when you were saying that story. Yeah.
Never heard of it. It's like it's the fanciest watch company in the world, but what the heck? Beautiful, many generations of a family. But we don't think it was really, that was a lovely moment. What do you love about being a CEO? And I'm sure you get very many different answers, but it really opens up a very, very different kind of conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, just to kind of keep this conversation moving along, so if you're now at that level, you're ready to affect change here, talk about how a leader should start to communicate and actually start implementing the change. What kind of leadership signals should they be deploying? And then if you're on the receiving end, what kind of leadership signals should you start to have an antenna for?
Okay, one of the big mistakes that leaders and everybody makes, but leaders almost more, is you think that what you've said is heard
Mm,
and remembered, which is like, hello. You even know in marketing you need 7 hits before something's absorbed.
right.
So that's the big one, is don't expect because you've said something that it's been heard. And then, so I'm working with 2 CEOs now that are trying to roll out strategies. And, like, why get my people like describe the strategy and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, all your people have been receivers of the strategy, co-created it, but in terms of this, now describing it, and you're expecting them to be able to be transmitters. So
Right.
why don't you, before you just send them out there, have them try to describe even to you? So that's this signal, or this is signal heard. Then the other big one I would say is signposting. So I was just I think I told you I had to fly from LA to London to help out a couple of big leaders who are having an issue. And basically, one of them would be sharing ideas, thinking he was brainstorming, and the other one thought he was making decisions. And so one thing is like to really clearly signpost, hey, I'm having this conversation now. I'm just brainstorming, you
Right.
know, um,
Make it clear what you're
or
trying to what you're doing. Yeah.
yeah, or one of the things I'll often say is, listen, I'm going to share an idea, but I don't even know if I agree with myself yet. So don't go anywhere with it. Or we're having the meeting now. What I would like to do is hear your views, and then I'm going to make the decision. Or here I am now. I want to hear your views. And then what I want to do is to have you decide who's going to move it. Like just this very basic, I'm naming something, I'm deciding something, we're going to, move ahead. We're just going to think how to like be very clear
And
with
deliberate.
and just naming it, because back to the sort of the platinum rule, I can be saying, so listen, I think you should blah blah blah, and you'll be thinking I'm telling you to blah blah blah, as opposed to I'm just thinking this is one of the many options for you. But how do I say I think you should do X versus, one idea that you might do to try this on is doing X. Does that land for you? Very different signposting and framing of what you're saying. And we think people don't need it, but they do.
Yeah, that signposting idea is really good. I want to definitely start implementing that. It just makes things clearer, it makes people more aligned. And then prior to that, you were kind of alluding to have some sort of confirmation cycle. I think
Mm-hmm.
you laid it out clearly in the book. You mentioned that a great way to end the meeting, because we've all been there. We have all been there in the situation where you believed a decision was made, you felt like everyone was on board or everyone got the same message, and then fast forward, the meeting ends and things fall through the cracks or the message isn't the same. And we've all been there. And so you just end the meeting with um the way to, what was your, just ask people, what was your understanding of what we agreed on?
Yep.
And that's a great question to
Yep.
end meetings. And I think just, prior to even that point, it's around, okay, if you are now a leader, you're a CEO, you're in a situation where you have to affect change, you have to give out these leadership signals. And so just pulling from your book, if you are in that situation, you have to realize that so many of us are operating without full knowledge. You have to realize that information is changing, it's ebbing, it's flowing, the conditions on the field are changing. I mean, there are surprises that come out of left field. So as a CEO and someone who's listening to the CEO, you have to hear certain things, like make sure you tell people that, what do we need to do? Where's our destination? What is a 10 out
Mhm.
of 10 for the most important external priority for you, the team, and the organization? Why does it
Mhm.
matter? Why are we going there? How does this priority relate to the organization's purpose, values? How does it create value for the organization? And how does it benefit
Mhm.
the people in the organization? And then how are we going to get there? What are the potential pitfalls? What are the limitations? And how do I know if
Mhm.
we're making milestones along the way? So that's like the list of quote unquote stuff that
Mhm.
you should have in that leadership kind of message. Like that first message you're putting out, should it contain that kind of information?
You know what? Next time David can't do a gig with me, I'm going to call you. So you can take David's spot.
I would be honored, even if I
That's
could just
great.
watch it all happen.
No, you really, I think more than pretty much any other podcaster, there's a lot of people who've read the book, but it sounds like you've like metabolized it. Like the book is now in your head.
Oh, yeah, for
And
sure.
you're able to not just be the receiver of it, but the transmitter of it. So that was great.
No, I appreciate that because again, I told you this offline. I mean, when I was reading it, I felt like I was getting like a mini sort of MBA education here around just what it's like to be in the mind or be a CEO, what it's like to be a coach, what it's like to create the stage, what it's like to actually understand that, again, as I mentioned earlier, the spectrum of humans exists. So reading your book actually makes me feel a little bit more empathetic. Um,
Mhm.
and again, it's just one thing, yeah, you can read a book, but I'm trying to now put it in my daily practice, whether it's at work or with home. You mentioned how you can use this framework in the parenting situation. Um, it's 100% true. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things where I've there's so many shifts in perspective, it's hard not to then translate it and try to transmit it out to the world.
So let me end with telling you what did happen in that dining room with my son.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, like,
Yeah.
what stance did you
So,
take and what was the outcome?
okay, so it's like, what should I really do? Just get the homework done, blah, blah, blah. Then, there's got the four stances. Like if you think again back to tennis player. So if someone's hitting to your forehand, you plunk your feet in one direction. That's your stance so that you can hit the ball. But because it's what's going on with your arms is secondary to where you place your legs. Then if it's a backhand, something else. So it's your stance. So for us, when things are coming at you, forehand, backhand, like what stance? And so very simply, we just shifted that into: do you lean in, lean back, lean with, or don't lean? And so that would be kind of leaning with, would be like really roll up your sleeves and get involved. And with Michael, that might have been, let's get your homework done. Let's really do this. You really need to, so it would be like that. Um, the leaning back would be more just sort of asking questions, being very rational, sort of doing due diligence, etc. Then leaning with would be like, oh, can I help you, more from a caring kind of place. Or you don't lean. So lean in, lean back, lean with, or don't lean. And an example I often give for that is if you were giving a presentation and somebody like sneered and rolled your eyes, you can imagine what would your default be, and then can you do something other than your default? So if you're going to
Right.
lean in, you'd say, excuse me, like, I really see you're unhappy with this. What's going on for you? Or if you're a little bigger leader and you can't do that in public, it's like, okay, I'm going to clock that and I'm going to talk to so and so after the meeting. Or lean back and sort of assess, oh, so and so is one of the people here. They're looking like they're not liking this material. Okay, duly noted. But and you'll go on, just sort of rationalize it. Leaning with would be like, oh no, what did I do to bother him? And then you might secretly tilt the entire rest of your talk to make that person smile and be happy because you need them to like you, or not lean at all, which is just not triggered. So there I am back in the dining room. And I've decided that the outcome variable is more like having Michael um, love learning rather than get the homework done, which I've done that one a bunch of times. And so I just, what the thing is, when you are able to not lean and just have a moment of doing nothing, what happens is thoughts can come to you. because all the other ones, you're producing the thoughts. When you don't lean, you give yourself the space for something to occur to you, something intuitive. Oh, yes, I knew that aha moment. So when I didn't lean, the thought that came to me was, which I said, it was a question. I said, Michael, here's what I want you to do. I want you to look at your homework and ask yourself, am I proud of my work? And if you are, go watch TV. And I walked out of the room.
And then what happened?
He stayed for a while. And he did a little something, and then he went out and watched TV, but he had a sense of ownership of it.
Mm,
And he did wind up being someone who loved learning, to the extent he also loves teaching. So whenever he's stressed, he calls me now and says, Mom, I have to teach you something. It'll de-stress me. So
interesting.
there's all kinds of things I know about. Like, did you know you need dust to make a snowflake? I can tell you about that like you can't believe. Or
Wow.
about metal fatigue, or about how to make silicon. He's now a mechanical engineer.
Nice.
But he did wind up loving learning.
That's a great strength, actually, and it's something that I encountered like late in my life. I didn't realize that my love for learning or love for education, which actually is strength. Once I labeled that in my head as a strength, I kind of like was able to lean into it, and
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, at least got me to this point. But one thing I know we're kind of coming up on time here, but one really important piece we didn't really get into, but maybe we can cover a little bit because again, in the context of really complex leadership situations, if you think about maybe you're a CEO who has to do a reduction in force, maybe you're a CEO who's now in a brand new organization, maybe you have to lead a merger, maybe you have to hit financial targets, whatever the case may be, the stakes are really high. So I really want to just get your view on what you would want to share around this idea of actually being able to generate options and different pathways in those moments. I know we've kind of talked about it and alluded to it throughout the conversation, but you talk about this concept of having way power.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you. What that whole thing, I give you the lean and lean back, whatever, in the context of relationships, but it also is equally powerful in the context of business outcomes, whether it's you're leading a merger and acquisition, or there's a big project, and it transcends the particular, not just relationships. Like if you're merger and acquisition, do you go in hard? Do you go in fast? Or do you say, hey, hold on, guys, let's do our due diligence here, slow down, or
Yeah,
lean with, like, what about the people? What about the culture? Or, okay, everybody, let's just pause a minute and take stock. Do we even want to buy this company? Like, wait a
right,
minute.
right.
And what this is based on is we have willpower and way power. So willpower is like grit and determination. You can just get things done. But now imagine you got grit, you got determination, and you got, oh dear, a fixed mindset. So you just do the
Mm,
same darn thing over and over and over. And you just throw your little self into that brick wall until like you break your nose. Then there's way power, which is, can I find, multiple ways forward? Sure, I could go into the bridge. I could go over the bridge. The brick wall. I could go around the thing. I could tunnel under it. I could do the high jump over it. There's like, I've got an obstacle. What are multiple pathways forward? And Rick Snyder and Shane Lopez really developed this concept of way power. And by the way, there's like hundreds of studies now that look at it and say that if you have willpower and way power, you are far more able to move forward and master obstacles, whether it's pain or performance, winning a race. They've done it with 3-year-olds, they've done it with great grandparents. So if you can really pull together willpower and way power, you really set yourself up for success.
just add it to the things that you have to balance as a CEO or a new leader. But I think this entire conversation has been incredibly fruitful. I mean, just so much knowledge. I appreciate you so much for taking time out of your busy day and busy life to spend some time with us and share space. I highly encourage this book. that people pick it up, because again, it could be for the actual CEO, but it also could be for someone like me who just wants to understand the game better and know how to navigate what I'm seeing.
Mhm. Yeah, I do think it's really helpful for everyone. And I'm delighted with your comment that it felt like an EMBA, because I would love to figure out how this book could really get into the hands of people doing MBAs or, executive MBAs. So thank you. It's really was fun. It was fun talking to you.
Yeah, it was fun as well. I look forward to staying in touch, and I can't wait for this to be out in the universe in terms of this podcast. I know the book is already having great success, but we'll just continue to have that ripple effect.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank